Okay, so uh, we took a nice sleep after having dinner. Like when I completed the stream, part one stream, I had my breakfast and then I was watching a documentary by phone. And while watching, I got sleepy, so I slept. Uh, yeah, so we got good 2 3 hours of sleep, and we are now refreshed now. Okay, so without wasting any more time, let's get back to our work.
What are the basic parts of a computer? Computers are very powerful machines that perform a variety of tasks, like writing documents, playing games, and browsing the internet. As a developer, it is important to understand the basic inner workings of a computer. The first major component of a computer would be the motherboard. The motherboard holds all the memory and connectors that are needed to run the computer. It serves as the main circuit board for the computer. Inside the computer case of the motherboard, you will find the CPU, which stands for Central Processing Unit. The CPU is a processor that is responsible for executing instructions and performing calculations. It is often referred to as the brain of the computer. The CPU is a small square with a chip that goes into the motherboard's CPU socket. The CPU processor speed is measured in gigahertz and megahertz. Gigahertz is a billion cycles per second, and megahertz is a million cycles per second. The next critical component of a computer would be the system's short-term memory, a chip that goes into the motherboard's CPU socket. The CPU processor speed is measured in gigahertz and megahertz. Gigahertz is a billion cycles per second, and megahertz is a million cycles per second. The next critical component of a computer would be the system's short-term memory. This is known as RAM, or random access memory. RAM is a temporary storage location for the computer's CPU. Anytime the computer needs to access data quickly, it will use RAM. The more RAM you have on your CPU. Anytime the computer needs to access data quickly, it will use RAM. The more RAM you have on your computer, the faster it will run, and the more programs you can run at the same time. If you're running low on RAM, your computer will run slower, and you will notice a difference in performance. It is important to note that RAM is a volatile memory. This means that it is lost when the computer is turned off. This is why it is important to save your work on your computer. When you do save your files, they are stored on the hard drive. The hard disk drive, or HDD, is a permanent storage location that is used to store data even when the computer is turned off. This is where all your files and software are stored. The hard drive is made up of a spinning platter and an arm. The platter is where the data is stored, and the arm is used to read and write data to the platter. When you have a faster hard drive, your computer will boot up faster and your programs will run faster. Another type of data storage would be the solid-state drive, or SSD for short. SSD is non-volatile flash memory and can be used in place of a hard drive. SSDs are faster and smaller than hard drives, but hard drives are cheaper and have more storage capacity. Another key component of a computer is the power supply unit, or PSU. The PSU is responsible for converting the electricity from the wall outlet into a form that the computer can use. It sends the power from the outlet to the motherboard, CPU, and other components of the computer. And another key component would be the expansion cards. These cards are inserted into the motherboard to add additional functionality to the computer. Examples of expansion cards would be the video card, sound card, and network card. The video card, also known as the graphics processing unit, or GPU, is responsible for rendering visuals on the computer's screen. The sound card is responsible for playing sound on the computer speakers. The network card is responsible for connecting the computer to the internet. Even though there are many more parts to the computer, these are some basic parts that you should familiarize yourself with now. What are the basic parts of a computer? How can you effectively work with your keyboard, mouse, and other pointing devices? Many of you have been used to working with your keyboard and mouse for years on end for a variety of activities like gaming, performing tasks for work, or surfing the web. But prolonged misuse of these devices can lead to serious health problems down the road. In this lecture video, we will cover ways to work with your computer's keyboard and mouse in healthy ways. The first tip is to be mindful of the mouse grip. When working on serious tasks for work or during intense gaming moments, you may tend to grip the mouse too hard. However, this can lead to serious hand and wrist issues. To prevent this, you want to make sure to hold the mouse gently and keep your fingers nice and relaxed. The second tip is to consider using an ergonomic keyboard and mouse. These tools are designed to reduce wrist strain by keeping your hands in a more natural position. While prices for these devices can vary and may be a costly purchase for your current budget, they can be a good investment in your overall long-term health. So you might consider starting to research an ergonomic keyboard and mouse to use. Another tip is to keep your mouse the same height as your keyboard. You don't want to have to reach up or down to use a mouse, as this can strain your wrist and arm muscles over time. You also want to be mindful of your overall posture when sitting at the computer for hours on end. Being slouched over your computer and putting your wrist in an unnatural position at the keyboard will lead to long-term health issues. So you want to make sure to sit up straight when working at your computer and maintain a healthy and natural wrist position. The last tip would be to use keyboard shortcuts whenever possible to help minimize typing. There are dozens of shortcuts available for tasks such as navigating the web, navigating around your operating system, working with a code editor, and more. So it's best to research some of these. What are the different types of internet service providers? First, what is an internet service provider, or ISP? It's a company that sells access to the global internet network, essentially, and they come in three different tiers. The first tier are the giant conglomerate companies, which have the infrastructure to handle most, if not all, of their network traffic independently. The second tier are the country-wide providers, which sometimes rent access to tier 1 networks but can stand fairly well on their own. The third tier are the small companies that primarily focus on providing internet to local markets and rely on larger internet service providers to provide their infrastructure. These providers will offer different types of connections as well. Fiber optics connections rely on glass or plastic fibers to transmit data via light, resulting in very high connection speeds and data exchange. Cable connections use the same infrastructure as a cable television provider, which often makes them readily available in many regions. DSL connections use the infrastructure that landline phone services use. Because of the prevalence of this infrastructure, DSL is available in areas where cable may not be. But this is also frequently a slower option. Dial-up uses the phone lines, but requires exclusive connection, disabling the use of What are safe ways to sign into your computer? Many of you have been using computers for a while, but you might not have thought about the safest or most secure ways to sign into your computer. Whether you're using a Mac or PC, there are many ways to safely sign into your computer. The first thing that you should do is to make sure that your computer is password protected. For Windows users, start by opening the Start menu and selecting Settings. From there, go to Accounts and then Sign In options. You can then set up a password for your computer. Please note that if you encounter any difficulties or are using a different version of Windows, refer to the official Microsoft documentation or support resources for detailed instructions tailored to your specific version. When creating your password, make sure it's a long and complex password. You can use a combination of letters, numbers, and special characters to make it more secure. Choosing an easy password like 12345 or password. What are the different types of tools professional developers use? Professional developers rely on a variety of tools to increase productivity and code quality. Let's learn about these tools, including the ones that seem very obvious. The first among the tools is computers. A computer is a primary development environment. It could be a heavy desktop or a portable laptop with either Windows, macOS, or Linux as the operating system. Professional developers often go for computers with fast processing power and plenty of RAM to handle resource-intensive tasks. After the computer is a program for writing and editing code right on the computer. That's a code editor or integrated development environment, also known as an IDE. IDEs like Visual Studio Code, IntelliJ IDEA, JetBrains, and PyCharm provide powerful features like code completion, debugging, and integrated terminal support. Visual Studio Code is essentially a code editor, but it also provides these functionalities with its rich extension library. Other code editors are Sublime Text, Atom, Notepad++, and Brackets. When you write code with code editors and IDEs, you need to track the changes you make to them. The tool that lets you track those changes is a version control system. Git is the most widely used version control system in the development community. Platforms like GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket provide cloud-based hosting services for your Git repositories. These platforms enable collaboration with other developers, allowing you to work on multiple branches, and facilitate the merging of code changes. Package managers are another critical tool. They help developers simplify the process of adding, updating, and removing libraries and project dependencies. Examples of popular package managers are npm, yarn, and pnpm for JavaScript, pipe, pip for Python, composer for PHP, maven for Java. After writing code with different tools, developers test that code to make sure it's working as expected. For this, developers use testing frameworks like Cypress, Playwright, Selenium, and others. There are also language-specific testing frameworks. Examples are Jest for JavaScript, PyTest for Python, JUnit for Java, and PHP Unit for PHP. You don't only need to test the code to make sure it's working as expected. You also need to test what the code looks like visually to the end users. Developers use browsers for this. Modern browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Edge, and Safari offer developer tools for inspecting HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. There are also tools for debugging and performance profiling. These tools help developers test and optimize their web applications across different browsers for the end users. How to use file management applications. A file management application is a way to store, organize, and edit your files on your computer. Whether you use a Mac or Windows computer, there are built-in applications that you can use to organize your files. If you have a Windows computer, the default file manager is the File Explorer. This is used to browse, search, and manage files and folders, as well as perform file operations like copying, moving, and deleting. To find the to browse, search, and manage files and folders, as well as perform file operations like copying, moving, and deleting. To find the File Explorer, you can go to the Start menu or press the Windows logo key on your keyboard. To pin a folder, you can right-click with your mouse and select Pin. To move a file or folder, you first need to select it, then select Cut, and then navigate to the new location to paste it. If you have a Mac computer, the default is Finder. This provides access to local and remote files, supports file previews, and offers a variety of organizational features like tags and smart folders. To access a Finder on your Mac, go to the dock at the bottom and click on the Finder icon. You will notice a sidebar on the left-hand side where your favorite folders are located. One way to organize your files is to use what are called tags. To tag a file or folder, you can select the item in the Finder and then right-click with your mouse. You will see the Tags option in the drop-down, and you can apply a custom colored tag. To search for tagged items, you can scroll to the bottom of the sidebar, type, date, or keywords. Folders are collections of files that are automatically organized based on criteria you set, such as file type, date, or keywords. Whether you're using File Explorer on Windows or Finder on Mac, these applications give you the flexibility to manage how to create, move, and delete files and folders using the Explorer or Finder. To create a file on Windows using the Explorer, you can click on the New option at the top right. This will show you a list of different types of files that you can create. You can also create files in their corresponding applications. Let's create a text file to show you the process. When you click on New and select the file type, you will see a new text file in your current folder with a default name. You can rename it if you'd like. The process of creating folders is exactly the same. Click the New button at the top right and then select the Folder option, or right-click on an empty spot and go to New, then select the Folder option. you'll see a new empty folder in your current location. You can rename files and folders by selecting them and clicking on the Rename option at the top. When the current name of the file is highlighted, you can start writing the new name of the file. Press Enter to confirm the changes. Alternatively, you can right-click on the file or folder and select the Rename option, or use the F2 keyboard shortcut. Write the new name and press Enter to confirm the changes. You can move a file or folder to another folder by dragging and dropping it into the destination folder. If you have it opened as a tab, you can also select the file or folder and select the Cut option at the top. Then go to the destination folder and paste it by clicking on the Paste button at the top. If you copied or cut the file previously, this button will be enabled. You can also do this by right-clicking on an empty spot and then clicking on the Paste icon. This will remove the file or folder from its original. What are some common file types you will work with in web applications? Files are classified based on their content and structure. The file type determines how a file is opened and processed by computer programs. We identify file types based on their extensions. A file extension is usually a 3 or 4 letter suffix at the end of the file name. The 3 main file types that you will work with in web applications are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML files contain the structure and content of the web application. They have an HTML file extension. CSS files define the styles. They have a .css file extension. And JavaScript files add more advanced functionality and interactivity. They have a .js file extension. As you develop web applications, you will also need to include images. These are some of the most widely used image file types. JPEG, which stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group, is known for its efficient compression. It's great for photographs and images. However, the compression is lossy, which means that some image quality is lost to reduce the file size. PNG, which stands for Portable Network Graphics, preserves image quality, even after compression. This results in larger files. PNG supports transparency, and it's great for images with sharp edges like logos and icons. The GIF image format supports both animation and transparency, but has a limited color palette. GIF stands for Graphics Interchange Format. And finally, we have SVG, which stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. It's a vector image format. These images can be scaled as much as needed without losing quality. Great, now that you know about image formats, let's see some video and audio formats. MP3 is an audio format known for its efficient compression. It's a lossy format, so some audio data is lost during the compression to make this file smaller. MP4 is one of the most common video formats. It offers good compression and supports multiple audio and video codecs, subtitles, and metadata. MOV, the QuickTime multimedia file developed by Apple, is primarily associated with QuickTime Player. Other popular audio and video file types are WAV, a lossless audio format that keeps the original quality of the audio, and WebM, a high-quality open-source video format. If you ever need to customize the fonts of your web application, you will also work with font formats. These are the 3 most widely used ones. TTF, which stands for True Type Font, is a font format compatible with different operating systems. WOFF is a modern font format, specifically designed for web development purposes. It stands for Web Open Font Format. These files are smaller because they have better compression. They can also store metadata, including licensing information. And WOFF2 is a successor of WOFF, with even more efficient compression and performance. You can also create archive files if you need to group multiple folders and files. The most widely used archive format is ZIP. ZIP offers lossless compression, so no data is lost during the process. It's widely supported across operating systems and software applications. And finally, let's talk about documentation. In web applications, you will usually find a file called README that contains information about the application, how to use it, how to install it, its license, and how to contribute. They are usually written in a format called Markdown. With Markdown, you can create structured documents with headings, subheadings, links, images, lists, and more. Markdown files have a .md or .markdown extension. Here you can see the README file of FreeCodeCamp's GitHub repository. You can create this detailed structure and format using Markdown. You will definitely read and write many READMEs throughout your career. Learning about these common file types is essential for web development. What is the difference between a web browser, a website, and a search engine? Web browsers are software applications that allow users to access and navigate the World Wide Web. They interpret and display web content, including text, images, videos, and interactive elements. Key features of web browsers include the address bar, where you enter URLs or search queries, and the rendering engine, which translates HTML What is CSS and what is its role on the web? CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, is a crucial component of modern web development. It's a markup language used to apply styles for HTML. In simpler terms, if HTML is the structure of a web page, CSS is what makes it look good. The primary role of CSS is to separate the content of a web page from its visual presentation. This separation allows web developers to create more flexible and maintainable websites. With CSS, you can control the layout, colors, fonts, and overall visual appearance of web pages without altering the HTML structure. Let's consider a simple analogy. If you think of a website as a house, HTML would be the foundation and framework, while CSS would be the paint, wallpaper, and decorations that make the house visually appealing and unique. CSS works by selecting HTML elements and applying styles to them. These styles can include properties like color, font size, and many more. By changing these properties, you can dramatically alter how a web page looks without changing its content. One of the most powerful aspects of CSS is its ability to create responsive designs. This means that with CSS, you can make your website look great on any device, whether it's a desktop computer, a tablet, or a smartphone. CSS allows you to adjust layouts, font sizes, and other visual elements based on the screen size of the device viewing the website. Another important feature of CSS is its cascading nature, which is where the cascading in its name comes from. This means that styles can be inherited and overridden, allowing for a hierarchical structure of styling. You will learn more about how the cascade works in future videos. Another important feature of CSS is its cascading nature, which is where the cascading in its name comes from. This means that styles can be inherited and overridden, allowing for a hierarchical structure of styling. You will learn more about how the cascade works in future videos. CSS also supports the use of external style sheets. This means you can keep all your styling rules in a separate file, which can then be linked to multiple HTML pages. This feature greatly enhances the maintainability of websites, especially larger ones. Instead of having to change styles on each individual page, you can make changes in one CSS file that will affect all linked pages. In the world of web development, CSS plays a vital role in creating visually appealing What is the meta viewport element used for? The meta viewport element is a crucial component in responsive web design. It's a special HTML meta element that gives the browser instructions on how to control the page's dimensions and scaling on different devices, particularly on mobile phones and tablets. Let's take a look at the basic syntax of the meta viewport element. This element is typically placed in the head section of your HTML document. But what does each part of the element mean? Let's see. The width device width part tells the browser to set the width of the page to match the screen width of the device. This is essential for creating responsive layouts that adapt to different screen sizes. The initial scale 1.0 sets the initial zoom level when the page is first loaded. A value of 1.0 means that the page is displayed at 100% zoom without any scaling. By using the meta viewport element, you're ensuring that your web pages are displayed properly on mobile devices. Without it, mobile browsers will typically render the page at a desktop screen width and then scale it down, which can result in a poor user experience with tiny and hard to read text. The meta viewport element also allows you to control whether users can zoom in and out of your web pages. While it's possible to disable zooming with the user scalable no attribute, it's generally recommended to avoid this for accessibility reasons. Many users rely on the ability to zoom for better readability, especially those with visual impairments. Here's an example of what not to do. Instead, it's better to design your website to be responsive and readable at different zoom levels, ensuring that all users can comfortably access your content. The meta viewport element plays a crucial role in creating mobile-friendly websites. It ensures that your carefully crafted responsive websites are displayed as intended on various devices, providing a better user experience for that all users what not to do. What are some default browser styles applied to HTML? When you start working with With HTML and CSS, you'll notice that some styles are applied to your web pages, even before you write any CSS. These styles are called default browser styles, or user agent styles. These default browser styles provide basic formatting to ensure that HTML elements are displayed in a readable way across all browsers. However, these styles can vary slightly from one browser to another, which is why it's important to understand them when designing a consistent look for your website. Let's take a look at some of the common default browser styles applied to various HTML elements. Headings are one of the most commonly used HTML elements and are styled by default to have varying sizes and weights. For example, H1, the highest level heading, is usually bold and larger in font size compared to lower level headings like H2, H3, and so on. These heading tags help define the hierarchy and structure of your content. Here's what the example looks like rendered on the page. Another element with default styles is the HR element, which creates a horizontal rule often used to visually separate sections of content. Browsers generally apply a simple line style, which creates a horizontal rule often used to visually separate sections of content. Browsers generally apply a simple line style to this element. To understand it better, let's look at this code example. The horizontal rule appears as a thin line with spacing above and below the text to distinguish between sections of content. Here's what the example looks like when rendered on the page. Next, we will look at the block quote element. Block quotes are used to indicate a section of text that is a quotation from another source. Browsers typically add indentation and sometimes italicize the text. The indentation helps set block quotes apart from the rest of the text, making it clear that this content is quoted from another source. Let's take a look at this code example. The block quote element will produce an indent on the text, applied by the default browser styles. Here's what the example looks like in the browser. Another element with the on the text, applied by the default browser styles. Here's what the example looks like in the browser. Another element with default styles is the anchor element A, which is styled with a default blue color and underlining to make it recognizable as a link. Let's take a look at the following HTML example. The following code has 4 paragraph elements with an anchor element in the middle. The anchor element is styled in blue with an underline to show users to go to the free Code Can Learn page. Here's what the output looks like rendered on the screen. Finally, we'll look at the unordered and ordered list elements. Browsers add basic formatting to lists, including indentation and bullets or numbers, depending on whether you're using an unordered list, UL, or an ordered list, OL. In this code example, we are using an unordered list and an ordered list. Both of these lists will be slightly indented to the right by default. Here's what the output will look like on the screen. For all of these examples, you saw how the browser applied default spacing, varying font sizes and weights to these HTML elements. In later lecture videos, you will learn how to reset some of these default styles using a CSS reset. What are inline, internal, and external CSS, and when should you use each one? CSS can be applied to a web page in 3 main ways: inline, internal, or external. Each method has its own use case, advantages, and limitations. What are inline, internal, and external CSS, and when should you use each one? CSS can be applied to a web page in three main ways: inline, internal, or external. Each method has its own use case, advantages, and limitations, and knowing when to use each one is essential for writing clean, efficient, and maintainable code. Let's break down the three types of CSS and when you should use them. Inline CSS is written directly within an HTML element using the style attribute. It applies styles to a specific element. Here's an example using inline CSS. In this example, we are using the style attribute to set the paragraph text to red. Here's what the example looks like rendered on the page. Inline CSS is generally used for quick, one-off styles or to override other styles for a specific element. However, it should be avoided in most cases because it can clutter the HTML and make the code harder to maintain. Most of the time, it's better to use internal or external CSS. Internal CSS is written within the style tags inside the head section of an HTML document. It applies styles to the entire page and is useful when you need to style a single document. Here's an example of internal CSS. In this example, the internal CSS applies blue text to all P elements on the page. You can see the result on the screen. Internal CSS is best used when you need to apply styles to a specific page, rather than across multiple pages. It's useful for single-page websites or when the styles don't need to be reused elsewhere. However, there are some downsides, such as not promoting reusability across multiple pages. Additionally, like inline CSS, it mixes HTML and CSS, making the code harder to maintain in larger projects. External CSS is written in a separate CSS file and linked to the HTML document using the link element in the head section. It allows you to style multiple pages consistently and is a preferred method in professional web development. Here's the HTML part of our code example. In an earlier lecture video, you learned that the link element has a rel attribute that specifies the relationship between the current document and the linked resource. On the other hand, the href attribute specifies the URL of the linked resource, indicating where the resource should be retrieved from. Here is the CSS of this example in a separate file named style.css. This example targets all paragraph elements on the page and sets the text color to green. Here's what the example looks like rendered on the page. External CSS is ideal for large projects where you want to maintain a consistent style across multiple pages. It promotes separation of concerns by having HTML handle the structure and CSS handle the styling, which makes the code more maintainable and scalable. Understanding when to use each type of CSS is crucial for efficient and effective web development. What are the different types of CSS combinators? CSS combinators are used to define the relationship between selectors in CSS. They help in selecting elements based on the relationship to other elements, which allows for more precise and efficient styling. We will discuss some primary CSS combinators and their use cases, starting with the descendant combinator. A descendant combinator is What is the difference between inline and block level elements in CSS? In HTML and CSS, elements are classified as either inline elements or block level elements, and this classification dictates how they behave in the document layout. Understanding this difference is crucial for controlling how your content is displayed on a web page. Block level elements are elements that take up the full width available to them by default, stretching across the width of their container. These elements always start on a new line and push other content to the next line, creating a block of content. Block level elements have the CSS property display block applied by default. This property ensures that the element stretches to fill the container's width and appears on a new line. Some common block level elements are div elements, paragraphs, headings, ordered lists, unordered lists, and section elements. Here is a code example of a block level element. In this example, we have two paragraph elements where the first one has a red border around it. Here is what the result looks like rendered on the page. The two paragraph elements do not share the same line because they are block elements by default. So both paragraph elements will take up the full width of their container, which in this case is the body element. Block level elements are ideal when you want content to stack vertically, such as paragraphs, sections, or larger blocks of content. They're commonly used to define the layout and structure of a web page. Inline elements, unlike block level elements, only take up as much width as they need and do not start on a new line. Property display inline applied by default. This property ensures that the elements remain within the flow of the content and does not break onto a new line. Common inline elements are span, anchor, and image elements. In this example, we have a span element nested inside of a paragraph element. The span element has a red text color with a green border around it, so you can see the highlighted word better. Here's the output of the code on the screen. As you can see, the span element only takes up as much space as the word red and does not push the following content to a new line. Inline elements are best used for styling smaller portions of text or content within a line, such as emphasizing a word, creating hyperlinks, or applying specific styles to parts of a paragraph.
Okay, guys, so I'm not in the mood of studying anymore. You know, I don't feel like studying anymore, so I'll take a break and I will return.